There are many ways a guy can find out that his wife is cheating. There's the popular surprise visit home. There's the tried and true, a friend told me. And of course, there's the time-honored, overheard conversation. I? I was tipped off by the Washington Post. This may seem a little strange, but most guys aren't married to a woman who spends time with a U.S. senator. Personally, I work in the private intelligence business. We do the same thing as the alphabet agencies, but we pay 10 times as much. I started out as a 35 limb in the 704th Military Intelligence Brigade at Fort Meade. Military intelligence may seem like an oxymoron, but my unit was stationed at the same fort as the NSA, so I was involved in some serious technology madness. I was a 23-year-old guy who had just graduated from Carnegie Mellon and the 97 Bravo course at Fort Huachuca. Needless to say, I was completely confident. I had a badge and the title of Special Agent, but in reality, I was just a nerd from the small town of Madison, Wisconsin. Madison may be home to the state capitol and a big university downtown, but you don't have to go far out of town to find yourself up to your eyeballs in cow shit. So for a Wisconsin farmer, Beltway culture was both a rich target and somewhat overwhelming. I chatted with another razor tail. His name was Art, and we both liked to drink and party, and the student ghettos around the University of Maryland always had an abundance of that. However, we preferred the Fells Point neighborhood in Baltimore. For one thing, it was much easier to get from there to our off-base apartments, which were in Glen Burnie. And nothing could compare to the perpetual party atmosphere of the Broadway Square neighborhood. One night I was sitting with Art at the Horseshoe Road Inn Saloon. How can you not patronize an establishment whose advertisement says it has been serving drinks since the 18th century? We were both slightly tipsy, but this was not at all what we had planned for the evening. We stared at a table full of girls. Nothing attracts predators like a whole crowd of visibly heated girls. And the wolves began to gather. While I watched, several women were dragged away to dance. It was obvious that everyone was in a jovial mood, until one of the obviously tipsy guys decided to push a woman who didn't want to dance. There was jerking, yelling, screaming, and loud slapping. When the scuffle started, I nodded to Art. "I'll handle this," and walked over to the table. The one doing the slapping was about to do something very stupid when I grabbed his raised hand. I said in the calmest voice I was capable of, "You need to leave, sir." He was furious and clearly not in the mood, so he abruptly turned to face me. I just continued his motion, twisting around him until his hand was caught between my shoulder blades. I showed him the badge I held in my left hand. I wanted to encourage him to reason with me. He looked at it grimly and muttered, "But she hit me, officer." I said, continuing in a policeman's tone, "It's all right, sir. You've all had a little too much to drink. Why don't you and your friends just find somewhere else to do it?" He looked at the rest of his team. They shrugged and headed for the door. I let go of his hand and he staggered after them. Fortunately, none of them had time to notice that the badge had been issued to an Army counterintelligence special agent, not a Baltimore policeman. I had the right to arrest him if he was involved in treason. But at the horse, it was just a piece of tin. The woman still looked shaken. Physical confrontation has that effect on people. I sat down in the vacant chair next to her and asked, "Are you okay? Can I get you anything?" It was the first time I really looked at her. She was of Italian or Greek descent. She had dark blonde hair, swarthy skin, beautifully proportioned facial features, and huge, glowing dark eyes. Right now, those eyes were clouded with a mixture of anger and fright. She was trying to calm herself down. I sympathetically placed my hand on her forearm and said, "It's okay. I realize it was scary, but you're among friends. Nothing will happen now." The fact that she didn't pull her hand away was a sign that she was coming to her senses. I said, still trying to reassure her, "What's your name?" "My name is Paul." She raised her head and focused her gaze on me for the first time ever, and I was confused. The blue spark that jumped from her eyes to mine must have lit up the entire interior of the bar. She said in a shaky voice, "Janet." I wasn't sure if the trembling was due to her recent horrible experience or what had just happened between us. I said, "May I offer you a drink?" Nothing calms the nerves like a little alcohol. "What do you drink?" She replied rather inarticulately, "Gin and tonic," and continued to stare into my eyes. Her concentration was unnerving. It was like she was scanning my soul. I said, "I'll be right back," and hurried to the bar. I wanted to get away from her so I could recover at least a little. I returned with her G&T and an English IPA for myself. She drank hers in one gulp. Impressive. She looked at me and said, "Thanks for stepping in, officer." He gave me a scare. But I'm not going to let anyone mess with me like that. And lowered her eyes to her incredible girls. I said, "First of all, I'm not a police officer. I don't have any more jurisdiction than you do. This is a federal agent's badge. I'm in the Army at Fort Meade." I really thought she could tell who I was working for by my tall and tight uniform. I said, "I just threatened him to do what he had to do himself. Force makes brains work again, even in drunks." She said, "So it was you who came to my rescue. How can I thank you?" It was an open invitation if I saw it at all. I said, "You can have dinner with me tomorrow, unless you are already busy. In that case, a sincere handshake and a kiss on the cheek will suffice." She kissed me on the cheek and said, "I'll see you tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. I have to get back to my bachelorette party, but here's my address." And she wrote something on the back of the card. I turned it over and it said, "Janet A. Wilson, J.D." I thought, damn, lawyer. Nevertheless, I pressed her call at 6 p.m. sharp the next day. She lived in a classic single-girl condominium in Bethesda. All I heard was yapping and the sound of someone shoving the dog away from the door. Then she opened it, and all doubts about her profession vanished like morning dew. Last night had been tangled up with drunkenness and general chaos, and I hadn't had time to look at the whole picture properly. Truth be told, I couldn't take my eyes off her massive bob last night. She was still struggling with something that resembled a hairless rat, but I figured it was a chihuahua. But she said, "Sorry about that. Chiquita thinks she has to protect me from everyone." The rat showed me its teeth and let out a low warning growl. I said, "That's okay. I love dogs." I didn't bother to add that my dog is a 100-pound Shar-Pei, Pit Bull, and Labrador mix named Buster. She pulled her varmint into the room and closed the door. Then she stepped out into the hallway and took my hand in that universal gesture that women use to indicate possession. She asked, "Where are we going?" I replied, "I thought we'd try to stop by the Blue Duck. I want to get to know you better, and their outdoor patio is a nice quiet place to do that." It was a beautiful, clear fall evening in Washington. She looked delighted. She said, "I've heard about this place and I've really wanted to try it. Rumor has it that it's very romantic there. You don't have anything planned, do you?" This was said with a flirtatious smirk. I jokingly replied, "Only if you do." And she hugged my arm. I drive a silver Mercedes SLK. Like all good German guys, I love superior engineering, and no one does it better than my people. Okay, maybe my people settled Wisconsin in the late 1800s, but the conventional wisdom in our family is that once a German, always a German. She was surprised. Pleasantly, I hoped. She said, "I thought all you big macho guys drove muscle cars?" I replied, "I don't like to advertise it," and shifted into gear in the silky smooth gearbox. We talked all the way to the restaurant, and then we talked some more. Janet was a Senate Armed Services staffer. She had grown up in affluent Chicago and received a classical education at Northwestern University and the University of Chicago Law School. She was 24 years old like me and was beginning to settle into the culture of Capitol Hill. The more we talked, the more we bonded. She was stunning. But she wasn't just beautiful, she was smart, direct, and very funny. That evening, I drove her back and dropped her off at the door. We stood there like that in each other's arms. She said, "I've never felt like this after a first date, but if you come on a second date, I'll rock your world." The next night, we went to Blues Alley, and she wasn't kidding. We listened to music and had a couple drinks each. Anyway, we got back to her house and she said, "Why don't you go to her place for the night?" So I went. I wasn't that stupid. In my experience, women with powers like Janet's usually don't bring anything else to the party. They seem to think that the guy should just be grateful that the woman deigned to let them handle the goods. That's how it all started. We dated for 6 months. That's how long it took for us to feel completely comfortable with each other. I met her parents when they came to the wedding. I could tell they admired mostly the uniforms and medals. That's what the uniforms were for. I wasn't about to educate them about fruit salads. For the most part, it was the same crap everyone else had. The army likes its soldiers to look like heroes when they're dressed up. We settled into a small apartment in Greenbelt. She could take the Green Line to L'Enfant and Capitol South, and I could take the Baltimore-Washington Highway to the fort. It was an idyllic period in our lives. Even the dogs slept together. Although I worried about how 100-pound Buster wouldn't accidentally crush 5-pound Chiquita in his sleep. Janet was advancing in her career among congressional staffers, and I was finishing my service with the rank of captain. After my discharge, I was hired by a private firm in Roslyn. I did the same analytics, but the pay was 6 figures, which had to do with the amount of money for the war on terror that was swirling around in Washington. We mortgaged ourselves to the hilt and bought a condo on the C&O towpath in Georgetown. Vienna would have been a lot cheaper, but we both liked the atmosphere of Georgetown, and we did everything 34-year-olds are supposed to do there. Our love life was still perfect. We made love 4 or 5 times a week and often more than once, and we had a tender, easy relationship the entire time we were together. We laughed a lot and spent wonderful quiet Sundays alone together, with a book and Chopin playing on the house speakers. All in all, it was everything you could expect and ask for from a marriage. One of the advantages of working in commercial intelligence is that you have a 9-to-5 schedule, not like it was when I was on active duty. I did mostly analytics with a team of GWU and Georgetown alumni who had puffy eyes and puffy tails. It was the usual general threat assessment I did in Army intelligence, but it was a superficial attack that was more business than military. So I dressed workmanlike, not in BDUs and berets, but plain. My men were only 8 or 10 years younger than me, but because I had served and was their superior, they treated me as if I were Methuselah. I liked that respect, but I missed the camaraderie I had with my crew at the fort. Janet was dressed as usual, businesslike. A smart and capable woman like Janet wants to be appreciated for what she does, not how she looks. Now, her work schedule was a little more erratic than mine because she was tied up with the committee. There were periods when she spent her free time working on constituency projects and would get home well before I did. Then there were periods of overload, especially at budget time, when she could be on the Hill all day and into the night. The previous December, Janet had been promoted to a senior political position. It was a nice pay raise, but the downside was that she had to spend late evenings on the Hill and at committee events. The promotion was unexpected, because you usually have to do a long internship before you get one of the real advisory positions. But she's a very smart woman, and frankly, I thought she was much more capable than the guy she was counseling. So it was well-deserved, at least in my opinion. She was the chief counselor to the chairman of the policy committee. The chairman himself was from one of those Bible Belt states where, judging by the people they kept sending to Congress, you wondered if any of his constituents had finished the 9th grade before marrying his sister. I met him several times. He was straight out of central casting for senators. Masculine build, with a direct gaze and a determined chin. He was in his 50s and 60s and had the determined look of a leader. But in reality, he was trickier than a deer gut on a doorknob, had never served, and his thick, wavy hair was slicked back into a bob. Nevertheless, he was fluent in the foghorn technique of Jay. He told the herd what they wanted to hear, no matter how illogical the message. It was a delightfully cynical approach to political reality. But the people who voted for him were still cattle. My own assessment of the guy was that he was a complete narcissist with the personal integrity of a used car salesman. In his mind, everything was for sale. But he served 3 terms in the Senate, and the seniority system put him in a position where he could prove without a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts. His blonde wife was as elegant and sophisticated as her husband, a convinced redneck. Apparently, she came from great wealth and had great influence in their state, bringing a respected member of Congress to the Senate. She looked like an aged Grace Kelly, blonde, slender, and regal, and his 4 children were a stepping stone from 19 to 25 years old. All of them attended out-of-state schools, which spoke volumes about how the senator felt about his state's education system. Janet said that this questionable paragon of American democracy in his personal life was actually a down-to-earth and kind guy. Personally, I had no confidence that my tax money was in good hands, and I didn't like the smirk he bestowed on me when we first met. I realized he was in a much higher position than I was, But he'd gotten that way because of his family's money, not his innate intelligence or hard work. As a senior member of staff, Janet was expected to attend events related to the committee. When necessary, I went with her, especially if it was a social event. But when she was working, she went alone. Of course, she always had to dress for the occasion. I was sitting in our room when she appeared in the doorway to say goodbye. She was going to the Kennedy Center that night for some event where someone was being honored. They're always handing out honors to each other, so it's hard to keep track. She was wearing a simple dark blue Versace dress. She was clearly in a pensive mood. I asked, "What's wrong?" She replied, "Nothing." Then she said with feeling in her voice, "Have you ever thought of leaving everything behind and living on a beach somewhere? Where did that come from?" She had clearly been under stress for the past few months, but with the new fiscal year and all the appropriations battles, September is a tough time on the Hill. And I thought, maybe she's just tired of all the hidden machinations. I replied, "Actually, no, but my job is not as stressful as yours. We should talk about it. Maybe it's time to talk about selling your services on K Street." She frowned and said, "Maybe it is, but power is hard to give up. It's intoxicating." Then she brightened up and said, "Why don't we go to Point Lookout next weekend? It'll just be you and me and nature there." And she threw me one of her trademark hot looks. I realized what it meant. We were sailing on a C&C 40, and we spent one of our most romantic weekends relaxing in Piscataway Creek near Fort Washington. We enjoyed the peace and quiet of nature and occasionally rocked the boat. Then we would end the weekend with a nice dinner at National Harbor or Old Town Alexandria. I said, "Sure, babe, we need to get you away from all this craziness and back to you and me, just like the good old days, before you were a power broker on Capitol Hill." I stood up and walked over to her to kiss her goodbye. She looked sad, but she looked at me with complete devotion. And she turned and walked toward the door in her 4-inch stilettos, leaving a trail of her special perfume behind her. It was the kind of scent that makes a man yearn. She looked back and said, "I'll probably spend the night at the Watergate. There's going to be a reception there, and I don't want to drive back after drinking so much." There was nothing unusual about this. It was her usual routine since she took over as senior, so I jokingly said, "I'll be safe and sound here, and no prostitutes or call girls, I promise." She looked at me like she wasn't sure I was joking. Then I smiled broadly and said, "Just kidding." She smiled back at me and closed the door. She didn't actually come back until late Sunday night. She called in the morning and said there was some business going on in the Russell building and she would be busy with paperwork all day. Finding nothing better to do, I spent the day in the marina doing whatever was necessary to keep the boat in shape. As the old saying goes, if you want to know what sailing is all about, just get under a cold shower and tear up $50 bills. Nevertheless, it was a totally relaxing and rewarding day. I took a nap, ate on the boat, and drove back. Janet arrived less than half an hour later. She immediately went upstairs to drop off her things and change her clothes. As she left, she took a small bag with her. I was waiting with a fresh G&T when she reappeared. She was dressed in tight yoga pants and a big, loose University of Chicago sweatshirt. Her hair was slicked back and she looked haggard. I sat down on a large sectional couch and she snuggled into my arm. She said, "I'm really tired from all this stress. As soon as the authorization bill for this year is passed, I will take a vacation and we can reconnect. I know I've been too busy over the last year and I'm sorry, I've been selfish. I promise that things will change. Just not tonight. I'm too tired to enjoy it properly. But be ready tomorrow. I won't go to the office. I'll be lying here all day, so I'll be rested." With those words, she finished her drink and headed upstairs. I sat there for a while longer, mulling over her words. She really had been weird for a while now, and she was also leaving the house a lot more often than usual. This seemed to coincide with her promotion, and I wondered if she was considering my suggestion that it was time for her to take up lobbying. After all, that's where the real money was. That she genuinely wanted to reunite was beyond doubt. Perhaps she'd decided it was time for something else. It was a baby. We put it off until we had a career. But at her 34, almost 35, she wasn't getting any younger. When I left for work the next day, she was still asleep. She looked both innocent and beautiful. I had breakfast as usual at the Starbucks by the Rosslyn subway station. That's where the blue shuttle from Georgetown stops. Then I headed off to work, feeling more awake than ever. It was a beautiful fall day. Outside my sixth-floor window, the entire city of Washington, D.C. was sparkling. I felt especially invigorated. It seemed that Janet and I had entered a new phase of our lives. There was a knock on the door, and Carrie, my assistant and mutual work buddy, entered the room. Carrie is 24 years old and has been my indispensable right hand for the past 3 years. She had just transferred to me from Georgetown. For the first year, I was her mentor. But over the last 2 years, she has shown that she can surpass me in analysis. She was very smart, fun, and always full of life, and her technical skills were second to none. She and Janet were a lot alike in many ways: smart, beautiful, energetic, and resilient. Carrie had short white blonde hair that seemed natural and the biggest green eyes you'd ever see in a cat. Her height was only 5'1". She seemed to lead an active lifestyle. I knew this because she would tell me about her adventures. She did so without being overly informative, just like one close work buddy having a conversation with another. Except those conversations were usually just between us tree dwellers. Of course, Carrie was more of a guy than a girl. She played field hockey at Georgetown for 4 years and grew up with 3 brothers. We liked any woman who could spell the alphabet. She was as dazzlingly energetic as ever, even though I knew she had spent the weekend with some guy in Manhattan. She said nonchalantly, "There's a man who wants to talk to you. He won't tell me who he is. Do you want me to let him in, or should I just throw him off the roof of the building?" I smiled at her and said, "Show this mysterious stranger out, but be ready to step in if I need your help." Her height is 5'1", and her weight is 110. I'm closer to 6'4" and 220. She gets the joke. My visitor turned out to be a small guy with a flabby face and wearing a hooded sweatshirt. I was about to say, "I'm not interested in buying illegal substances," when he produced his ID and said, "I'm Arnie Gold from the Washington Post, and I'd like to take a minute of your time." Okay, that was interesting. I leaned back in my chair, trying not to look too curious, and asked, "What can I do for Arnie?" He said, "You know," and showed me a picture of Senator Cornpone on his phone. I was puzzled. I said, "Yes, of course I know. My wife Janet Schmidt is one of his senior staffers, and I've met him many times." He said, "I don't want to ask you that." He clearly wanted to ask me about that. But we were investigating the senator, and your wife came up several times in the course of the investigation. I asked, "What do you mean?" He said, "Let me ask you bluntly. To the best of your knowledge, is your wife having an affair with the senator?" I slowly stood up. I leaned toward him, spreading my arms wide across the table. Veins protruded on my neck. I must have looked like I was about to leap across the table and pounce on him. My posture might have been aggressive, but my voice was relatively calm. I said, "What the hell do you think you have the right to come in here and ask me questions like that?" He leaned back in his chair, but said with the same calmness in his voice, "I've observed the two of them on different occasions and in different settings, and given their behavior and some of the things I've been told by the senator's staff, I believe they have a relationship." That struck me like a thunderclap. Janet is unfaithful? The beautiful, intelligent, and poised woman who was my soulmate is cheating on me? Such a thought had never crossed my mind. We had always had a close and cozy bond. There was never a time when she acted aloof or was displeased with me. She never refused me anything. However, this rodent from the Post told me a fatally opposite story. I said, "Why the hell should I know what she's doing with that vile piece of shit? She's with him because she works for him. And frankly, what business is it of yours? What makes you think you can just come in here and ruin my life?" He looked a little hurt and said, "The senator is one of the leading conservatives standing up for family values, and the public has a right to know if he's really being hypocritical. This is a story that needs to be told, and if it's true, it's going to generate a lot of headlines. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it." And so it came out. This little weasel imagined himself to be the latter-day incarnation of Woodward and Bernstein. I was sure he had already prepared a place on his mantle for a Pulitzer. I said coldly, "I will not dignify your accusation with any comment. My wife is a loving and faithful woman who will in no way betray my trust. A senator may be morally bankrupt, but my wife is not. And I don't like you implying that. So please, go away." He looked like he was going to say something else, but instead he stood up and held out his hand. I shook it, and he said, "Here's my card in case you change your mind." I walked him to my office door. I opened it and let him out. Then I closed the door, went back to my desk, and sat down. Waves of misery swept over me. Suddenly, the day didn't seem so bright to me. At that moment, a blonde girl with a mop of hair and mischievous eyes peeked through the door. She asked in her usual flirtatious manner, "What did that creepy guy want?" I thought for a moment. My heart told me I needed a friend, and my brain was telling me I needed someone's help and advice. I couldn't do this alone and stay sane, so I crossed my fingers and said to myself, "This is it." I looked at her and said with overly seriousness, "He was from the Washington Post." Carrie had the look that many of her generation get at the mention of the hoary old lady from 15th Street. Her generation believes the Post carves its news on stone tablets. I said, "He wanted to tell me something personal, and I think I need to talk to someone." She sank into the chair across from me with the impatience of a Jack Russell Terrier waiting to be thrown a ball. Her gorgeous round face with huge green eyes looked worried. She asked, "What did he say to you?" I said cautiously, "Carrie, you and I have been working together for almost 4 years now. In that time, I've come to consider you one of my best friends. I don't have many friends or even people I trust, but you are one of them. So I'm counting on you to keep this a secret forever. If you can't promise me that, then we should forget I even talked about it." Her bright green eyes clouded over with resentment, and she burst into tears. "Women," she said, "you can always trust me. You've been my mentor, my friend, and the only person I've been able to rely on in my entire life. I will never betray your trust." I thought, yes, indeed? Where have I heard that before? But what I actually said was this. This guy was a reporter. He's investigating the senator that Janet works for, and in the course of his investigation, he came to the conclusion that she was having an affair with him. He wanted me to confirm that, which of course I didn't. But if there really is something between them, I'll be all over the 24-hour news. I think you realize that it would be both personally embarrassing and a complete breakdown of our marriage. He said, "I just can't put up with that kind of infidelity, and frankly, if Janet is doing something like that, she's not the woman I married." Carrie looked shocked. There was something else in her eyes, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Her usually cheerful appearance had changed. Her face went from a beautiful, fresh glow that made her look about 16 years old to a much more rigid and focused one. And in that instant, I realized why she was such an effective analyst. Her mind was the proverbial steel trap. She said with concern in her voice, "What can I do to help?" I replied, "I'll have to figure out what's going on, and I'll need your usual technical help to get things up and running." And added with a grimace, "Depending on what I find out, I may also need a shoulder to cry on. And I'll also need a partner in crime if it turns out to be as bad as Gold says, because I'm not the kind of person who'll rest until I've settled the score." She looked at me with an unwavering glint in her eyes and said with conviction, "You got it, boss." I knew she was going through men like they were snack food. I always assumed she led the carefree life of a single girl, and sometimes I worried about her. Now I realized that the woman sitting in front of me was not afraid of men or situations because she was always in command. She was very tough. I returned home at the usual time. Janet was my one true love, best friend and companion throughout my adult life. She had contributed as much to who I had become as my parents had, so I didn't need to pretend to feel the comfortable camaraderie. She ran downtown, bought empanadas and fritters at Tapas Truck, and was already laying out dinner on the back patio when I walked in. We ate dinner and started a new routine. She took a shower. I checked her cell phone and checked her personal and work laptops. Thank goodness she had brought her work laptop with her so she could work remotely today. Otherwise, the task would have been much more difficult. A remote access Trojan gives you absolute control over the computer on which it is installed. I was mainly interested in accessing her camera and audio functions. After all, it would allow me to be on the other side of a one-way mirror through which to observe her life. Normally, getting into someone else's car required some sort of social engineering, but since I had physical access to Janet's two computers, it took less than 10 minutes. Most of that time was spent hacking into her passwords. All of her devices were password protected, but John the Ripper, which was my hacking tool, had a good laugh at how simple they were. I buried both rats in RAM so they would load before any antivirus software. Janet was drying her hair in the bathroom when I finished opening the book of her life. Was this a completely reckless deception towards the love of my life? Absolutely. Would I do it again? Absolutely. I needed to get an answer to that question before my head came off. The next day, I was in the room finishing setting up a malicious connection to her laptops. I wanted to have her devices nearby to make sure everything was okay. Home infiltration is no longer a major technological advancement. It used to be. But now, it's what 18-year-old guys do to spy on their girlfriends. The tools, know-how, and step-by-step instructions are all online. I installed a man-in-the-middle app on her phone. It was basically a phone line, and I was listening in on every phone conversation. The bug was connected to a voice recorder in the cloud. The GPS function was also connected to a tracking app that gave me information about Janet's movements. The rats on 2 of her computers were backdoors. They gave me full control over the laptop's functions when I accessed them from my device. They were also set up to record and remotely upload anything that happened within camera view and microphone hearing range. All of these as if things were fine with me. So I headed off to work. It was another beautiful day in the neighborhood, but my mood was by no means elevated. I knew I loved Janet with all my heart, and I believed she felt the same way about me. There was nothing in her demeanor to indicate that another man was in her life, and there was no mysterious power imbalance in the rhythm of our marriage. Janet knows how to work with people. A respected senator would have been a prime target because he was the one who could get things done for her. Perhaps that's exactly what Gold was observing. But either way, I knew I'd have answers by the end of the week. Carrie, as usual, was sunny. I said, I think I need to let the rats run around for a couple of days and then on Saturday I'll get on with what we have. She said, I have 3 bugs on LTE lines connected to the dark web server you had me set up. There's a terabyte of storage in there before we have to reconfigure the server. That's enough for a week's worth of audio and video recordings. How's it going? I replied, there's nothing to hold on to. There's no evidence that she's lost her way, and I still have faith in her. Carrie threw me the look she saves for the terminally naive and said, something is bound to happen. I'm a woman and I know how it all works. We're loyal because we chose to be. You can't chain us to the wall anymore. Therefore, a girl will do what she wants to do. Our choice may be dictated by morality, religious beliefs, or a simple sense of personal honor. But it is our decision and ours alone. Men have fun with anything that moves. But for a woman, cheating is a much more conscious decision. The motive may be nothing more than anger or boredom. But we always do it for a reason. That's why women prefer to have fun with bosses, richer or more physically dominant men. It gives them something they don't already have. Sure, there are some hopeless sluts out there, but most of us don't seek fornication. And there would be fewer of them if the world of men weren't so relentlessly aggressive. There are men who are just as worthy and honorable as you are. But they are as numerous as those who have no conscience or sympathy. It's the thrill of the hunt, the selfish feeling of scoring another point. And you as a woman are just prey, a prize to be won. When one of these guys picks you, they're doing everything they can to win. They portray to you the person you want to be, but the person they portray will never be close to who they really are. And they don't treat you like a human being, with feelings that can be suppressed and dignity that can be trampled on. All they're interested in is getting in the win column. Our problem is that women have an unrealistic idea of who we are. We are brought up to believe that we always have to be perfect. So when we fail, no matter what the reason, we tend to just accept the situation. It's as if we have to keep entertaining Prince Charming, no matter how much of a frog he turns out to be, because we can never undo the challenge. It's our punishment for stepping out of line in the first place. Then she threw me a confused look and said, I know. I've found myself in that position a couple times myself, and I'm willing to bet that's exactly the situation your wife is in. In the depths of my lizard brain, I knew Carrie was right, but I was still in denial, so I said, we'll see. Maybe I believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, but I just wasn't ready to accept the fact that my marriage was over. And make no mistake, it was over if what Carrie said was true. Needless to say, the rest of that day and the ones that followed were difficult. A lot of it had to do with the realization that I was probably writing the end of my own story. Another part of the problem was that Janet had become particularly affectionate, making me feel like an evil son of a bitch. I got the impression that she had somehow had an epiphany. She had never been known for love and respect, but for the previous 4 or 5 months, she had often been late for work. Now it was as if she was going out of her way to make time for me. I never would have noticed this change in behavior had Mr. Gold not visited me. But in retrospect, her actions looked a lot like remorse. I tried to live my life as usual. I went to work and came home as usual. We did things together, chatted as usual, and that week we cuddled and made love again. I had no idea what I was going to do. I wanted to preview the data before deciding how to proceed, but even the most cursory review of the videos was going to take hours. So I decided to postpone Armageddon until Saturday morning. On Saturday, I got up well before Janet and left her a note informing her that there was an urgent need at work. When I arrived at the office with my usual Starbucks and bagel, several people were already there. Carrie wasn't among them. She was back in Manhattan. She told me she planned to show up early Monday morning to look good. Apparently, this guy seemed more serious than her usual dates. I waved goodbye to a few coworkers as I walked in, walked to my private office, and clicked the electronic lock. I do top-secret stuff, so there's a scaled-down version of Tempest defense systems in the walls, and my workspace is very secure. Carrie used the old .mil site on the dark web as our cloud. So if someone finds my rats, they'll lead them to a place that hasn't been active since Gipper was president. I went through everything we'd collected over the last 4 days and found that we'd just about exhausted our memory limit. Her work laptop had over 100 calls, emails, and hours of video footage. There were fewer videos from her personal laptop, as she obviously only used it after work. I set to work fast-forwarding through the videos. By 10:30 a.m., I had the whole horrifying picture. She was amused by it. Everything was absolutely accurate. It was disgusting. They seemed to confine their dates to her office, which was much less public than his. Yesterday, I finally got a great video of both of them. Perfect for my purposes. It was actually filmed on her personal laptop. She was working on it at a side table next to her desk when the bell rang, and he pointed across the room. She stepped back to her desk to answer the call. Her work laptop captured her sitting down in her chair and picking up the landline phone. I realized from her conversation that the congressman was calling from his office to see if she was available. The time was yesterday, 8:13 p.m. She was sitting at her desk doing something, and at 8:37 Senator Dushagub showed up at her door. He came in, closed, and locked the door. He said, "Everyone has gone home. Did you fire them, right?" She sat down right in front of the laptop in her office and replied a little glumly, "I sent them all home like you asked." He said, "Good. Then let's get down to business." Romantic little devil, isn't he? She sighed and got up from the table. Once in range of the personal laptop camera, she headed for her couch. Half an hour later, she stood there looking hopeless as he smugly left the room. Then she began to cry. Last night she came home well after I'd gone to bed. But I went to bed early. I was glad I did. I turned off the video and just sat staring into space. My head was empty. I felt nauseous. The pain was almost unbearable, and the pain continued to throb. I realized with irrevocable certainty that my new reality was a stark emptiness. I kept telling myself that I was strong enough to handle it. But there was a black void in my mind. The impact of this thing just overwhelmed me. I put my head down on the table and burst into tears for the first time in 30 years. It was embarrassing as hell. But thanks to the shielding, no one could hear or see me. After a couple minutes, my self-respect awoke in me. I needed to get a grip on myself. And start acting. I stopped crying, went to my private bathroom and splashed my face with water. After drying my face, I looked into my red eyes and said, "You're on your own now, soldier. So get your ass cleaned up and stop being such a wuss." After what I'd seen, there was no way I was going to stay married to Janet. But that thought had blown a hole in my previously complacent outlook on life. Everyone should have a sense of security. Mine was built around my marriage and hers. Perhaps it was foolish to put all my eggs in one basket, but that was the path I had chosen. Now I realized how mortal I really was, and it was really frightening. Nothing was certain for me now but death and a burning hatred for Senator Jubal Early Simpson. I realized it was time to close the door and move on to the next part of my life without Janet. The terrain I traveled through was as bleak and barren as the desert, but I felt that I could keep the remnants of my sanity if I held on to my hatred. I was still in a fugue state. All I could think about was to retreat to a quiet place and think. As I walked to my car, a completely inappropriate thought struck me. Thank God I decided to take the car and not the blue bus. I couldn't look her in the eye yet. I didn't want anyone to find me, so I drove the Range Rover to Fort McNair. I have a reserve officer's clearance on that base. I stashed the Rover in the back lot of the NDU near V Street, locked it up and walked 200 yards down Buzzards Point to James Creek Marina. I cast off and sailed down a short stretch of the Anacostia to the Potomac. I kept the boat on the diesel engine all the way down the river to Belmont Bay. When the sun was about to set, I dropped the bow and stern anchors. Traveling down the Potomac was somewhat therapeutic. It was another beautiful fall day, and I tried to focus on what still suited me. I had a job that I loved, and I had a few good friends, especially Kari. If I ever needed her, it was now. But I had too much pride to interrupt her weekends. I had just turned 35, and I was in decent shape. I would find another woman and rebuild my life, as daunting as that prospect sounded. But first, I needed to pay off my debts. The thought of the scorched earth I was about to bring into Senator Simpson's life almost made me whole again. My phone started ringing around 3:30 p.m. I was working out a plan and was totally reluctant to talk to Janet. After that, she called incessantly and I disconnected the call. There was plenty of alcohol on the boat, but I'm not the type to get drunk to take my mind off things, so I sat in the cockpit in the dark, sipping a Yuengling and listening to the birds and insects of Occoquan Bay. Then the phone buzzed again. I reached to turn it off and saw it was Kari, not Janet. I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, babe." Carrie's angry voice replied, "Where the hell have you been? I've been looking all over for you." I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "Hi to you too. How's New York?" Carrie replied, "To hell with New York." As soon as Janet called me, I realized the balloon went up here and flew back 3 hours ago. I've traveled every possible place looking for you. You need a friend. A tsunami of gratitude swept over me. Of course I needed someone. And Carrie was my best friend. That is, now that my former best friend had disqualified herself. I asked, "Will you tell Janet where I am?" She replied, "Of course not. Not unless you want to." I thought for a moment. All the way down the river, I had been working out a plan, and it depended on not getting the slightest hint from any adulterer I knew. But I could not meet Janet without giving myself away. So I said, "You can call Janet and tell her you just found out I'm on some super secret assignment overseas and can't talk right now. Make something up. Make it sound plausible. Tell her I'll try to get in touch with her when I can, and that I love her." "That should calm things down," Carrie said with disbelief in her voice. "Judging by your behavior, you found out she was having fun with that creep. And you still love her?" I replied, "Oh, I love her. I just never want to be in the same room with her. Right now I'm trying to piece together what's left of my broken heart. But there are a lot of missing pieces." Carrie, "Where the hell are you? I'm coming to you." I replied, "I'm in a boat. I'm in Belmont Bay off Woodbridge, but don't come." She replied, "I'll be there in an hour," and cut the connection before I could say anything else. Exactly 1 hour later, she called me from the dock at Belmont Wharf. She was standing under the light of halogen lamps, holding a small suitcase. She boarded and disappeared down the gangway. I opened a couple bottles of cold Yuengling. She came out, walked over to where I was sitting and kissed me on the forehead. She stepped back and held me at arm's length, while her huge, bright emerald eyes studied my face. The fact that she was standing and I was sitting, and the fact that she was looking me almost directly in the eye only emphasized how tiny she was. She said with concern, "I know it hurts. Do you want to talk about it?" I replied, "Not really, not right now. I'm still trying to process what I saw, and I may never be able to get over it. It hurts too much, and I don't want to lose it right in front of you. But I want to talk about payback. Can I offer you a beer, and you can help me come up with a plan to end them both? Agreed?" She stood up to her full height, gave me the British Navy salute, where she got it from I don't know, and said, "Aye, aye, 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 skipper." So we spent most of the night drinking beer and plotting revenge. Her presence was like a pharmacy full of happy pills. She was the epitome of what separates women from men: caring, comforting, supportive, and utterly tender. She also had a very sick and devious mind. It was Kari who remembered that my wife's work laptop might still be connected to their office network. Janet never turns anything off, and if it was still connected to the network, then through the rat we had access to everything the senator had on the server. Considering the state Janet was in when she left last night, following security rules might not have been at the top of the list. I entered the quarters, activated the rat, and made sure of it. The esteemed senator's life was an open book, so I downloaded all of his personal files onto a portable hard drive. There was so much there that the download took the better part of 2 hours over the LTE connection. But I still wasn't going to sleep. This information would give me an excuse to dig into it tomorrow. Once the download was complete, I wiped the rats off. I didn't want any of my NSA colleagues to find out how the classified information we'd gathered with the vacuum cleaner had been leaked. I asked Carrie to come up on deck so she could give a plausible rebuttal. She looked at me like I was crazy and said with heat, "Where you go, I go." I think she was impersonating Braveheart. The time was nearing 3 a.m., and I could see that even my sweet little Energizer bunny was starting to run out of steam. So I said, "Let's get some sleep. There's a cabin in the bow where you can lie down. Just pull the curtain. I'll sleep here in the cabin on the couch." She replied, "No way, asshole. You're too long for that couch. Let's lie there together. I promise to respect your virtue." This was accompanied by a seductive smile. I said, "Seriously, my hot-blooded friend, it will be many years before I can touch another woman." For a second, she looked almost insulted. Then she brightened up and said, "Of course you're a big dummy. I understand how hard this is for you. I know you loved her, and I realize this must be ripping your heart out by the roots. I'm here as your friend, and I want to comfort you. Just feel my body next to yours and realize you're not alone." I slept in just sweatpants and a t-shirt, she in a long t-shirt. I was lying on my back, she was lying on her side, facing me, and then she got comfortable and pressed her firm little buns against me. She's a paradox, but a very cute one. She may be tiny, but she is firm and wide and grounded. We drifted into sleep, and amazingly enough, I slept for hours without any problems. She had really changed. I awoke to the sun shining through the prisms of the deck. I was lying on my right side, snuggled up against Kari. Save! I immediately jumped out of the cabin and rushed to the head. With horror, I thought, "What the hell are you doing? You've lost the love of your life and you're already snuggling up to this pretty girl. Are you really that stupid?" Then I thought, Carrie has been my assistant and best friend for so long that everyone calls her my work wife. She's just a familiar and sympathetic face, that's all. And it takes a human connection to keep from going crazy. Shit. The whole world knows she's beautiful. But she's a good person and she was just trying to comfort me. She would never do anything to make your situation worse. We both knew I had an incredible amount of emotional trauma ahead of me. And there was no way I would dishonor my marriage or my dignity by being intimate with another woman until things were settled. Even one as stunningly attractive and amazingly companionable as Kari. So I wrote it off as an unfortunate coincidence and nothing more. She wasn't ready to be anyone's woman yet. The fact that she was willing to give up her obviously very active life was a testament to her devotion to me as a friend and mentor. That thought reminded me why I was sitting on a yacht and not at home. There was no explanation for what I was witnessing. And as much as I needed Janet, and I still needed her, I knew she was out of my life. It's a myth that love lasts forever. Love only lasts as long as the conditions that shape and nourish it exist. One of the basic conditions for sustaining love is unconditional trust. A guy may get over a one-time mistake influenced by the moment, but the thought of your wife having fun with another man on demand, perhaps for months on end, simply violates every aspect of the marriage covenant. Such behavior was even understandable, but impossible to forgive. And as a result, my love for Janet vanished as if she had turned out the lights. I would regret her loss until the day I died, but I was no longer attached to her. The only question was how to end the marriage in a way that would cause maximum pain to Senator Douchebag. Any port in a storm? I was sitting in the cockpit looking out over the Occoquan marshes when Carrie came on deck. It was a beautiful day. I handed her coffee in a heavy ceramic mug. She has a thick cap of white blonde hair that she wears short. On a larger woman, it would look wild, But on her, it was adorable. She's cuter than a basket full of kittens. That is until you really look at her. Then you see the absolute perfection of her features, the extraordinary size and depth of those green cat eyes. Her eyes are like the eyes of a hentai schoolgirl, huge and seemingly innocent. But if she lets you look into them, I mean really look into them, you'll see glimpses of deep feminine wisdom. I can't imagine how she became so wise at such a young age. I said, "Good morning, my dear little accomplice. I hope you slept well." She wrinkled her nose adorably. Carrie has a round face with apple cheeks. She looks like the archetypal head cheerleader. Blonde with fair skin and two deep dimples on her cheeks next to her wide, sensual mouth. The dimples appear every time she smiles, and this only adds to the impression of her all-American appeal. Janet, on the other hand, has a gorgeous, exotic, dark Mediterranean beauty, with the high cheekbones of a classic beauty. And Janet has probably never looked innocent in her life. Carrie said, "Before I woke up, I had the most wonderful dream. Do we need to talk about it?" I replied, "Maybe later. I want to talk about something more pleasant first. And that is the war to the knife with the illustrious Senator Simpson. I need your thoughts on that." She asked, "May I know what caused the crisis? Or is that too complicated for you?" I think I can give you better advice if I know the situation. I know her terminology sounds trite, but when she's on a mission, Carrie tries to sound like the high-level analyst she is. I said, "It's being recorded on a laptop in the cockpit, but it's pretty raw material. It pains me to look at it, but I know that these videos can do a lot of damage to the participants. It's just a question of how to use it." She said, "Let me watch it while you sit here and plan your terrible revenge." She left the booth after 45 minutes. She was crying. She just stood there with her hands clasped together and looked at me. She said, "I'm so sorry, Paul. It must be awful." And then she added, "I'm even more sorry for Janet." What was that? I thought that after observing Janet's promiscuous behavior, Carrie might want to help me chop wood for the fire. She said, "I don't know why your wife is having fun with this creep, but it's clearly killing her. As a woman, I can attest that she is not giving herself to him willingly." I said this with disgust. Did we just watch the same video? Kari looked at me angrily and said, "Grow up." It was the first time she had ever spoken to me in a disrespectful tone. She said, "Your wife is broken by this guy. She does what she's told, even if she hates it. And she clearly hates it. I don't know how it happened or what he put on her. But she craved what I saw, no more than a prostitute craves a client. She was just doing it. I'm not saying this so you can get back together, or even so you can forgive her. All I'm doing is letting you know. And I'm telling you that the real culprit is her boss." I said, "Well, I agree with you on that, and I have a couple ideas, but I need to get to a quiet place with strong Wi-Fi." Janet bought the secret agent story? Carrie laughed and replied, "She hated it, but she bought it. She said you'd have something to fix when you got back. Honestly, I think she thought you two were having a secret affair." I said, "So no one will be looking for me on Monday, right?" She replied, "At least none of the officials." I said, "I'm going to drop you off at the marina. Your car is there, right? Then you can go back to your place tonight and be at work early tomorrow morning." She looked like she was going to argue. I said reasonably, "Carrie, you have to do it. I don't want any change in the routine, and if we are both absent, it might raise suspicion. Plus, I want you away from the blast radius." She replied, "I'll do that, but only because your words make sense. On the other hand, if you need me, you better call me, or I'll hunt you down and do terrible things to you." I put her ashore by the dock. She stood and watched me cast off into the bay. Then she turned and walked to her car. The last thing I saw was a glowing cap of hair. I had plenty of time to think heading back upriver. On the diesel, I can get the old girl up to 10 knots. So with the throttles open, the return trip to James Creek Marina took about 3.5 hours. After tying up the boat properly, I crossed V Street and picked up my car. There was no one around. Of course, it was a Sunday morning, so no one was supposed to be around. I took South Capitol through Anacostia to Highway 295, and from there to the Beltway. Then back across the Potomac on US 1 through Alexandria to the Hilton Alexandria Old Town Hotel and checked in. I had lived on the ship in the same clothes for almost 2 days, So the first thing I did was go to the Banana Republic clothing store on King Street, and the next stop was toiletries. After I showered, shaved, and put on my new outfits, I felt halfway normal again. I then sat down at my laptop to, as my father used to say, get down to killing rats. Revenge is a cleansing emotion. It gives you focus and direction. I wasn't thinking about how much I was hurting right now. My mind was focused on coming up with ever more inventive ways to make the object of my hatred miserable. I knew that, at the very least, the video evidence would be difficult to explain to his fundamentalist entourage, and also to his wife. But just posting them on the internet or giving them to Gold would not be enough. First, I needed to have some fun. I realized that my desire to confront this guy was childish, but this son of a bitch had dishonored my wife and ruined my life, and I wanted him to experience the same feeling of hopelessness and devastation that had become my new reality. So I was forced to look that bastard in the eye when I explained the situation to him. I wanted to see his terror when the jaws of the trap slammed shut. I had to see him the moment he realized there was no way out, and I wanted to see him violently resist that knowledge. But to maximize his pain, I had to learn everything I could about his miserable life. I'm not as well versed in all these wired gadgets as Kari is. She grew up in that generation. But I have the experience that proves I'm the best at the analytical craft. So I opened the personal files we pulled from his server. I hoped that a day spent among the senator's deepest secrets would prove enlightening. The server automatically backed up his clients, so even though the dumbass was religiously wiping his computer, the hard drive in his office had a backup of all his personal files. That's what we downloaded. And since the good senator didn't even know what encryption was, let alone use it, his entire criminal enterprise was right there in easy-to-read plaintext. It didn't take long to realize that he was using a classic pay-to-play scheme worthy of Detroit City Hall. Only a smug, overly titled jerk with no concept of accountability would keep evidence of such blatant corruption on his computer. But the good senator seemed to think he could do whatever he wanted with no repercussions. I guess if you were in the atmosphere of the Senate, you might see things that way. But it was simple arrogance. And as a result, the senator was about to learn that your actions always have consequences. I'm a small, insignificant David. And the senator probably thought he was an invincible Goliath, especially when he had the might and majesty of the entire federal government behind him. But the virtual world is a game changer. And in this world, the right person with the right technology can defeat anyone. By late afternoon, I had assembled a collection of materials for Gold to analyze. These revelations could win him a Pulitzer Prize. The dossier included names, times, services rendered, and amounts. There were also account numbers and information about where the good senator had buried his loot. Along with this irrefutable evidence of corruption, I enclosed a videotape. The recordings of kickbacks were criminalized acts. The senator would eventually go to prison for them. But there's nothing like a juicy scandal to send vultures flying. And the Post wouldn't have needed independent corroboration to attach to the video I provided. I recorded everything on 2 thumb drives and put them in an envelope. I was supposed to give it to Gold tomorrow. But first, I needed to watch Senator Hrenov squirm. Carrie considered him the architect of Janet's downfall. So I wanted him to experience, at least briefly, what it was like to live in emotional hell. He was constantly surrounded by personal guards and subordinates, so first I needed to bring him out of hiding. The best way to accomplish this was to make him an offer he couldn't refuse. I figured he wouldn't want witnesses around when we discussed such a poisonous topic as his amusement with my wife. So I took a short videotape of the thrilling climax of their little rendezvous, this time with Janet's face uncovered, and sent it to his personal email account. I was sure this revelation would land on the congressman's desk tomorrow, and I hoped it would be Janet checking his messages. That would give me 2 pluses. Of course, I didn't want to implicate my friends at Fort Meade, so I sent the message using a TUR browser bundle. I put it through enough nodes that the senator's boys would try to figure out how the Bratva got involved. To reinforce the deception, I included a message in bad English. It read, "Sir, you are a very bad boy. We need a conversation now. Please come to the National Mall on Monday at 2 p.m. On the wall, sit closest to the memorial. Don't bring the police with you. You're a bad boy." I was about to turn off the light when suddenly I had the urge to call Carrie. I wanted to hear her voice. The phone kept ringing, and I was about to hang up when she answered. She was panting. I said, "Oh my God, did I interrupt something?" She replied, "That's okay. I'm glad you called. Are you all right?" I said, "I'm really sorry to call so late, but could we meet tomorrow at 11 a.m. at the King Street subway station in Alexandria? I'll fill you in on some of the new developments. Now get back to what or who you've been doing." She grinned and said, "His wait will be worth it." I laughed as I hung up the phone. I thought, what a woman. I dozed off, feeling better. I was going to destroy the bastard. But first I'd see how he'd get away with it. Janet was in for some bad news too, and for some reason, I felt sad. Her betrayal had created two realities for me. I hated her to the core, but at the same time, I still had the remnants of the love we'd created over the past 10 years. In every way but one undeniable fact, she was the perfect wife, friend, and lover. Those memories were neatly tucked away in another part of my psyche, relatively untouched by my current pain. I was certain that Janet had never meant to hurt me, but that didn't change the fact that her actions had left me alone and destitute. Tomorrow, I was going to settle the score with the senator, and that kept me going. I knew that when it was done and my divorce from Janet was settled, and it sure wasn't going to be easy, I was going to have one hell of an interesting life ahead of me. I waited for Carrie at the subway exit. I tried to convince myself that I needed her help, but I couldn't fool myself. I just needed her. She had become more than just a partner in crime and a battle buddy to me. She was the only person I could fully trust and rely on. She got off the Blue Line train at 11 o'clock sharp. I was standing on the other side of the automatic turnstiles as she walked by, looking around for me. When she saw me, her face lit up and she walked quickly toward me, swaying as she walked. She looked calm, collected, intelligent, and in complete control of herself. I said, "I'm sorry I interrupted your fun last night. I should have been more attentive. I just have something else on my mind and I need your help. I know I told you I wanted you out of it, but I can't do it on my own." I replied, "Can you take the rest of the day off?" She replied, "You're my boss, can I?" I said, "Call and say you're looking for something and come back tomorrow. I don't want my disappearance to be linked to yours." She replied, "Got it?" and dialed the number. We crossed Diagonal Road near the train station and walked into Joe Thiesman's. The lunch crowd was just beginning to gather, and we immediately took seats. I told her what I had discovered. She said, "What an idiot. If you're going to prosecute a corruption case, you should keep the evidence in a safe like they did in Mayor Daley's day. Not put them out in public where anyone can get to them." I said, "To a man of your generation, that goes without saying. But don't forget this guy is old, and he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Besides, he's not afraid of evil. After all, he's the meanest bastard in the valley." Dimples appeared on her face. That face is infectious. I had to keep reminding myself that Carrie was off limits, at least until I got my marriage sorted out. It wasn't about her hot body or her face. She was just a complete package of tough, smart femininity. She made me feel confident. She asked, "What do I need to do?" I replied, "A guy is going to meet me at the reflecting pool, only he doesn't know who he's going to meet. I just want to look him in the eye and tell him everything that's going to happen to him. But I need you to keep an eye on me while I do that. I have no idea what he's going to do with what I sent him, but he might bring some friends with him. That's why I need someone to watch my back and warn me when trouble is coming." We spent the rest of our lunch break scrutinizing our plan and then parted ways. I didn't want to allow any chance of exposing her. The senator showed up at 2:05 and sat on the decorative wall, next to the reflecting pool on the side of the Lincoln Memorial. He looked very casual. In fact, he looked scared, and that's a good thing. I decided to give him time to reflect. Carrie sat with her back leaning against the marble balustrade by the second step leading up to the memorial. In front of her was a camera on a tripod, but she was actually using a telephoto lens to view her surroundings. There was an open connection between my cell phone, which was in my shirt pocket, and her phone. She would alert me if she saw anything. She was sitting on the part of the wall that overlooked the reflecting pool toward the Capitol. There were a few tourists nearby, but no one got close enough to eavesdrop. I thought, for a penny, a pound. I stood on the grass behind him and said, "Good afternoon, Senator Simpson. May I join you?" He turned around as if he was in the desert and had just heard a rumble behind him. I stood with a neutral look, not angry, not pleased. I had purposely positioned myself so that he would have to assume a tense pose to look at me. It was planned. I could see that he knew me, but couldn't figure out where I was. I just stared at him for another minute. Finally, it came to him. He said, "You're Janet Schmidt's husband." I walked around the edge of the wall and sat down next to him. I said, "Bingo, that's the one." I could see the fear in his eyes. Politics is all about image. And thanks to me, his trip from the penthouse to the outhouse was going to be on a high-speed elevator. I said, "Yes, indeed. I am Janet's husband, and I'd like to tell you about the situation you're in. I have a lot more material than the clip I sent you. It's clearly you, so there's no way you can deny it. And it's not something you're going to want to see on YouTube." He said angrily, "Where did you get these pictures?" I replied, "That's none of your business. You only care about what I'm going to do with them." He looked at me reproachfully and asked, "How much?" This guy was really an egregious scumbag. He thought I had sold Janet to get blackmail money out of him. But I had to keep my cool. He was toast. I just had to finish telling him about it. I said, "Here's what's going to happen. First, I'm going to give all this to the guy at the Post who's investigating you for his article on moral purity in the Senate. Then, he'll publish it. In the meantime, I'll set up a website. I've been recording you for a while, so it will have what you've already seen and more. It'll probably go viral and I'll make a lot of money." He looked horrified. He growled, "But you can't do that. Think of what you will do to the country. Think of my constituents." I laughed out loud. I said, "I am thinking of the country and your voters. They will surely want to know what the voice of family values is doing for them in Washington. I'm also sure your esteemed colleagues in the Senate will want to know what you're doing." It all resembled the cackling of hyenas. They would tear a wounded pack member to shreds. He absorbed it all. There was a pause while he realized the implications. Then he lowered his face to his hands and roared. This was a pleasant surprise. He turned out to be an even bigger jerk than I'd anticipated. But watching his public frustration was enjoyable. It mirrored my personal frustration as I realized the reality of my own situation. Grinning, I said, "Man, you're a raging wuss. You're crying just like my wife did after you entertained her last Friday night?" And about Janet. If you tell her all this before I get the pleasure, I might do a few more things to you that you definitely won't like. Then I smiled patronizingly and said, "But unlike you, I am a decent man. Therefore, I will allow you to fall by the sword in true corrupt Washington fashion. I will allow you to leave your office to spend more time with your family. If you do so in the next 24 hours, I will not refer the matter to the Post." He looked at me impatiently and said, "Will you let me do it?" Had he resigned honorably, it would have saved his bacon at home, instead of being exposed as the piece of shit he really was. I said, "Like I said, I'm a decent man." And then I had absolutely no intentions other than to put his pathetic morals on display for all to see. But it would make our conversation that much more meaningful when he found out I was as crooked as he was. He stood up, took my hand in both of his, in that classic politician's grip, and shook it eagerly and gratefully. In fact, he said with tears in his eyes, "Thank you," and then turned and headed for the reflecting pool. He was battered, but not yet broken. The next 24 hours were going to change a lot of things for him. I called Gold and asked him to meet me at the Madison for a mid-afternoon drink. It wasn't far from the Post. Carrie was sitting with me at a table at the bar when he walked in. I walked over and we shook hands. I said, "Do you remember my colleague Kari Whitman?" He gave her an appraising look, as all guys do, and replied, "Of course I remember." At least he was honest. I handed him the envelope and told him in the most general terms what was on the 2 flash drives. I said, "I owe you an apology. My wife had an affair with Senator Simpson. All the evidence is on this disc," and I handed him the first one. Last night I put together a 15-minute compilation of Janet's greatest hits. It was killing me to want to relive it again, but I wanted to control what Gold saw. Still, even 15 minutes of what I gave Gold was enough to end the senator's career. Then I held out another disc. I said, "Here is all the documentation on the multi-million-dollar fee-for-service scheme the senator has been running since he took over as chairman. It has all the details. Even by Washington standards, this is corruption. It was stolen from his hard drive, so you'd have to confirm it from other sources. But the trails your investigators can follow and the rabbit holes you can look down are clearly marked. I'm sure the Post has the resources to dig this up as soon as possible. Gold looked at me in surprise. He said, "If what you say is true, this will be the political story of the year, and the good senator will be doomed. I won't ask you how you figured that out, but I can congratulate you. This is terrific stuff." I said, "The information I just gave you is Carrie's doing. She is the genius behind it all." He said, "How can I help you?" I replied, "First of all, keep Janet out of this if possible. She is a victim, and I want her protected." Gold said, "Even if she cheats on you?" I replied, "I want to be fair. She ripped my beating heart out of my chest, but it's personal. When you post things like this, the shit hits the fan in quantities I can't even imagine on Capitol Hill. She doesn't deserve these consequences. She may have cheated, and that's bad enough. But she's not a criminal." We shook hands and Gold withdrew. Carrie looked at me in surprise and said, "That was very decent of you. What's next?" I sighed and replied, "I'm going home to face the music." She looked concerned and said, "Do you need anything from me? Maybe I can help you with something?" I replied, "This is a battle I have to fight alone. I envision all of this happening in the next 24 hours. I'll probably see you at work the day after tomorrow." Carrie said in a cheerful voice, "She'll be expecting you to entertain her. Are you going to do it?" I fake coughed and said, "Dengue fever, or maybe Ebola. At any rate, I'm too sick to touch it. It won't matter by tomorrow." As we parted, Carrie stood up and kissed me on the cheek. She looked completely miserable for a change. She said, "Be brave, boss. I'll always be there for you if you need me. Call me anytime." I looked at her beautiful little sad and worried face and said, "You will be the first person I call, and I'll never forget what you did for me." When I returned, Janet wasn't home. I changed into my most comfortable clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, and got ready a little. Then I sat down to wait for her in the living room. There was a rock clip on the laptop in front of me. She arrived around 7, carrying Chinese food from Kitchen Hash 1. She set the bag on the table in the foyer and went straight upstairs. 15 minutes later, she returned in her standard house attire, yoga pants and a loose sweatshirt. She picked up her bag and headed into the kitchen with a concerned look. When she saw me in the room, she sighed slightly, and a look of boundless joy appeared on her face. She dropped the bag and ran towards me. I stood up. She hugged me and kissed me hard. Until that moment, I hadn't said anything. I was too overwhelmed with emotion. She pulled away and said, "Thank God you are home. I was so worried. Where have you been?" I said, "Sit down," and gestured to the soft leather chair next to my desk. Then I uttered those 4 fateful words, "We need to talk." She looked puzzled and concerned. She sat down. God, she was gorgeous. I said, "First, I want to tell you that I love you more than my own life. I've never loved anyone but you, and I probably never will, but I know." She looked as if she was about to say, "No what?" And then it hit her. Her face turned deathly pale. She groaned and said in a strained voice, "Oh God, no." Then she collapsed back into the chair. I said, "I have a video that I'm going to leave here on my laptop. I want you to watch it. When you're done, we can talk." Then I stood up and hit the play button. She flinched. I left the room to the sound of her sobs. I picked up the fallen bag of Chinese food and headed for the kitchen. I put the bag in the refrigerator. I don't think either of us would want to eat tonight. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared into space. I completely disconnected from time and reality. Finally, she appeared in the doorway. She was crying really hard, covering her face with her hands. Stumbling, she walked over to where I was sitting and sat down in the chair across from me. She put her head down on her hands and sobbed for a couple more minutes. Finally, I said, "Janet, we need to talk now." She slowly raised her head and looked at me. Even though she was crying, her tear-drenched face was beautiful. I said, "I made a vow not to ask why, and you don't need to tell me how sorry you are. I just want to talk about how we're going to break up." She shrieked, "No! You can't do that!" This was starting to piss me off. I was getting tired of people telling me what I couldn't do, especially adulterous whores. She cried, "I love you, Paul, only you. I hated betraying you, but I couldn't stop. He's so strong. He just wouldn't let me. I said, I have no idea what that means. You're a human being. All you had to do was say no and walk away. She looked shocked. She asked, what did you do? I said, there's going to be an article in the Post tomorrow about your cheating. It'll be very heavily illustrated, if you know what I mean. Your lover is finished. He will resign and ride off into the sunset with his loving wife. That is if she doesn't kick him out for being a total sodomist. Don't worry. The Post will keep your name out of it if possible. She lost all color in her face. She said, this will ruin him. I replied, I certainly hope so. And anyway, what business is it of yours? Do you love him that much? She readily replied, he's my boss. He put me in the position I'm in. I don't love him. I don't even like him. I only love you. I said, okay, I'm a sucker, even though I promised myself that I would. If you don't like him, then please tell me why you had fun with him. And if you say it was just for sex, I'll walk out of here without another word. She pulled herself together and said, I was trying to help him with a job in his office. He is a very important and influential man. His leadership and guidance affects everyone in the country, and I thought that by comforting him, I was making a difference. A couple months after I started working for him, he came into my office and told me he was going to kill himself. He said that the burden of the decisions he had to make were too much for him, and that he couldn't take it anymore. We were the only people left in the office, and I was horrified. So I just sat on the couch with him and held him while he cried on my chest. I thought, her breasts? What an obvious place to land. He told me that his wife is a bitch and frigid, that their marriage is a sham, not like ours where we love and support each other, and that he needed me as a comfort and a guiding star. I thought, oh my God, does that phrase really work on anyone other than terminally stupid women? She added, anyway, that's what happened. I just did it because I felt sorry for him. That's all. She was seduced by power. It's such an ancient trick, it was probably used as far back as Caligula. Janet added, after that he came to see me periodically for discharge. Then he started taking me to social events instead of his wife. A couple times we even had dinner with the president. It was amazing to be so close to the highest power. I just got sucked into it all. What she had just told me was a perfect example of pure, unadulterated, narcissistic female egotism with a dash of narcissistic delusion. She enjoyed being lusted after by famous and important men. She still states, I did it to him first, and it made me feel unbearably guilty. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't want you to be hurt. I knew you wouldn't understand the importance of what I was doing. We socialized in different circles. I knew you'd never hear about it. And when I was with him, there were so many people covering for us that I didn't think you'd find out. So I put my guilt in a box and kept it there. With you, I acted the same way I always have. You didn't suffer in the least, and I made sure you were well taken care of. I thought, nice job on the separation, you schizoid slut. She purred, that's not even close to how much I love you. When I was with him, it was like I was a different woman. It was naughty and the power was intoxicating. It was just part of my job. However, it definitely expanded my ego when I realized I was needed by such a powerful man. I was changing the life of an entire country. It was also all I needed to walk out the door with no regrets. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was the stupidest argument I'd ever heard. Did she really disrespect me and our marriage so much that she was trying to justify her behavior with a flag? Or did she really believe I was that big of a fool? At the end, she said, but then he started treating me like I was just a piece of meat. And I resented that. I hated him. I thought, what kind of person is this? This is certainly not the beautiful woman I once loved. I said bitterly, congratulations. You are now an experienced slut, and on top of that, you're stunningly beautiful. All that's left is to spread the word, and I'm sure you'll find some other powerful daddy to take you on his staff. She sighed and replied, how can you say that? You are my only love, and I know you love me. We need to put everything else aside and focus on fixing our marriage. I may have gone a little overboard, but this was a special situation, I promise you. I will never make a mistake like that again. Forgive me, and I will dedicate the rest of my life to making it up to you. You're out of your mind if you think we have any chance of recovering from this. I'll file for irreconcilable differences rather than adultery, But don't contest it, or the world will see lots of pictures of you on the internet. My attorney will be in touch. Please communicate through him from now on. I never want to speak to you again. She gasped in agony. This was my insult. With those words, I stood up and walked resolutely towards the door. I picked up the sailor's bag, which I placed next to her. I had packed enough to last me on the ship for a while. I turned around to look back one last time. She wasn't looking at me. She was sobbing loudly, resting her head on her hands. I didn't regret my decision one bit. But I was desperately mourning the loss of a happy life and the woman I loved. I was truly alone now, like a cat in the rain. Safe harbor. I walked down the brick driveway and threw my large suitcase into the back seat of the Range Rover. I don't know how other men would have reacted to what had just happened, but I was exhausted and completely devoid of emotion. I would have been in a wild rage if not for the satisfaction of realizing that I had completely ruined the life of the man who had brought me to where I was. I should have hated Janet, but she was the love of almost my life. We'd been through too many good times for me to despise her. All I felt was a sad sense of loss, emptiness, and betrayal. Saying I felt like I shouldn't expect any better treatment from life. I planned to spend the night on the yacht. I had everything I needed for a temporary stay, and in the short term, it would allow me to take care of all the urgent business that needed to be done as my marriage ended. I hadn't yet called my lawyer or thought about a new place to live. I was too busy sucking up to the senator. But I'll do all that tomorrow. I called Gold as I drove through Maine toward Fort McNair. He was intrigued by the fact that Janet had been to dinners at the White House. He said he was going to take some time to see where this tip might lead. I asked, "Do you really think she was having fun with the president?" He replied, "I'm sure he tagged her if she was available and in the right place. Maybe I'll dig through the visitor logs and see what I can see there." I didn't know what to think about being in the same hole as the most powerful man in the free world. I was stowing my things below deck when the thunderstorm that had been threatening all day finally broke. It began to rain heavily. The wind and waves rocked the boat on its moorings. It wasn't violent. In fact, it was even soothing to listen to the rain pounding the deck above me. I opened a bottle of Bowmore 27, turned on Beethoven's Immortal Ninth, and sat down to drink and think. It was quite obvious that I had just had my last conversation with Janet. I struggled with the fact that I would be alone, probably for the rest of my life. I knew I could never trust another woman, at least not enough to let her into my life. It was all too painful. And I had no desire to repeat the experience. I understood the context. Janet was trapped in power, and she loved being there. Politicians come and go, but actors like Janet live in a Darwinian culture. And it's only natural that she gravitates toward the person with the most influence. Janet is gorgeous, and Simpson wanted her. So he used his influence to get her. Case closed. Janet got the short-term fame and sense of self-importance that comes when one revolves in circles of true power. It would have been a smart choice if she hadn't been married. But now that the senator was gone and I was gone, she had absolutely nothing. Janet had already called several times. I had not the slightest desire to listen to further reasoning. I would delete her voicemail later. The phone rang again as I used 2 fingers to finish my heavenly drink. This time it was Carrie. I glanced at the clock. It was 12:30 at night. I asked, "What's up, baby girl?" She replied, "Geez, Paul, are you okay? Janet just called me completely hysterical. She said you dumped her and she doesn't know why. She still hasn't watched the video." I grinned and said, "She thinks a blazing 5-month affair with a senator is no big deal. She says she was just having fun with him for the good of the country. She can't understand why I'm making such a fuss about it." I added, "So I'm going to live on the boat until I find a place of my own." A heavy roll of thunder rumbled overhead. I added, "It's tied to the pier, so I won't need lifeboats." She laughed and said, "What's the matter? Do you want me to come over?" I grinned and replied, "The sleeping quarters will be the same as Saturday night, so not likely. I'm starting to feel a little better about my life and don't want to complicate things just yet." But one thing still keeps me on my toes. After listening to Janet's ramblings, I'm beginning to wonder if I haven't spent 10 years married to a fake woman. The one I'm socializing with doesn't have the slightest moral compass. Carrie said, "It happens. Women grow up creating an image of themselves based on the morals that society imposes on us. It's something we internalize and reflect back to ourselves. It's our way of gaining approval. This identity is unrealistic by definition because it is based on other people's opinions. Yet for most women, it dictates the way we live our lives. And so it goes on until temptation comes our way. It is then that a woman discovers that she finds it difficult to say no to her baser instincts. To say no to such a tempting thing, you have to really realize its price. And it seems Janet has yet to deal with her inner slut. Janet likes to have fun, right? I replied, definitely. So that's it, replied Carrie. I'm not saying she's schizophrenic. I'm just saying that the woman you were talking to is an evolved version of the Janet you used to know. She still sees herself as your loving wife. It's just that she's made a new discovery. The Janet you fell in love with most likely still exists, exactly as she used to be. But the new one, the Janet who discovered she could use her body to manipulate powerful men, will continue to rationalize her promiscuous behavior. It's as if she now has an evil sister. And that sister will continue to commit uncontrollable and self-destructive acts until the former Janet learns to channel her natural impulses into a more constructive approach to life. I said, "Wow, this is really heavy stuff. How did you become so wise?" She laughed bitterly and replied, "From painful experience, and I've done it twice. I had to do a lot to regain my self-respect." I said, "Thank you for telling me about it. At least I can sleep well knowing that the two-faced slut I talked to today wasn't always like that. In the meantime, it's been a long day, so we'll talk tomorrow." I fell asleep with the boat still rocking in the wind. As I fell asleep, I decided not to fool myself anymore. Carrie Whitman was one hell of an attractive woman. And even if I was done with animals, I wouldn't stop marveling at what life could be like with someone as tough, smart, and insightful as Carrie was. The next day, the Post put the story on the front page of its online edition, under the bold headline, "Senator Simp Sin." It was picked up by CNN, as well as every national publication. Gold kept his word and did not name Janet specifically. But that didn't stop the media juggernaut from trotting around like a pig after a truffle. Eventually, Janet's name came up. By the time the print edition came out, her face was plastered all over the national news, which of course effectively hung the horns on me. The media jackals found out where Janet lived, and she left our house pursued by a pack of reporters and paparazzi. I watched this turmoil on the local news. It was heartbreaking that the person you once loved looked so defeated. I knew the next time they would come for me, so I cast off and headed for the mouth of the Potomac. The journey took all day, but by late afternoon I was lying in a deep water cove off Point Lookout. My mysterious disappearance and information about my intelligence activities had caused a storm of speculation that lasted for the usual 15 minutes allotted to the media. The jerk kept saying all day that there was not a shred of truth to the rumors of infidelity, that they were lies made up by a jealous husband. So I used up my entire data plan to upload videos of his misadventures to separate sites. I then sent the URLs to TMZ. The worldwide interest this story generated practically blew up the internet. Given the rumors swirling around town about the president's connection to Simpson's mistress, I'm sure the White House would have ordered extradition if it thought it could get away with it. Instead, it decided to throw Simpson under the bus. Amazingly, all of this happened within 36 hours. And then Gold pulled off the big one. Thanks to what I'd given him, the Post researchers had no trouble following Simpson's muddy footprints to the buried treasure. And so the evening edition of the paper came out with a long and detailed article on the corruption and cronyism of Washington insiders. The author of the article was Gold. I thought, do I smell a Pulitzer? Nothing like a hint of scandal to get all the politicians in a circle. His buddies in the Senate forced Simpson to resign the very next morning. The former senator then found himself in the process of prosecuting the attorney general for extortion and bribery. His wife returned home to her daddy, who owned most of the valuable land in that state. Fulfilling the prenup was a given, but in his interview on the Today Show, Daddy also hinted that he was exploring ways his favorite legislators could make it legal to draw and quarter in his home state. I look forward to seeing this plan come to fruition. I made the necessary phone calls while exposing my soon-to-be ex-wife's antics. I've always had a personal college buddy. Given what we do, legal advice is an integral component of Intel's private business. I didn't need to explain the context. Thanks to the 24/7's press, you'd have to be living under a rock not to know about my situation. He asked me what happened. I replied, she drank the Kool-Aid served on the hill. That was all that was required, and it was enough. He said, don't worry about anything, Paul. I'm not going to ask where you are. I suppose you're hiding from the press. I replied, they'll never find me. Jim continued, I already have your power of attorney and will make all the necessary legal and financial arrangements. Tomorrow night, I'll send it to the court. Everything will be fair game. I know that's what you want. I added with great sincerity, you know, I'm really sad. I guess I still love her. He made a sympathetic sound and hung up. Janet didn't call for a while. She must have had her own things to do. I wondered if she and the former senator were fighting off the wolves. The thought pleased me. The phone rang around 7 the next morning. I was still asleep. It was Kari. She said, I assume you're hiding somewhere. Do you need company? I got it. After all the offers and rejections, I realized what she was telling me. I pondered this for a few meaningful seconds. This woman has been an important part of my work life for a very long time. In fact, over the past almost 4 years, I had interacted with her perhaps even more than I had with Janet. She was my only friend and companion during my recent troubles. She possessed a feminine wisdom that was boundless in both scope and depth, and she was breathtakingly beautiful. And she was clearly in love with me. The question was whether I was ready to start a relationship with a woman before all the debris of an old relationship fell to the ground. I had a necessary confrontation with Janet face to face, and any prospect of reconciliation was negated by my national exposure as her clueless husband. So, the past was dead, and the road ahead was open. But the question was whether I wanted to jump into the fire with a potentially heartbreaking woman like Carrie. If I invited her aboard, I knew we'd have to do it, and I wasn't sure I was ready for those consequences. But despite all my Hamlet-like hesitations, I absolutely knew one thing. I really needed Kari, and I wanted her by my side. So after an awkward pause, I said, you can come, but it will probably be the end of our careers. I'm leaving this den of iniquity forever. Do you still want to accompany me? Without a second's hesitation, she replied, where shall I meet you? I picked her up at the wharf in Reedville, just over the Virginia border. She parked her car in the parking lot where the boats are stored. I gave them $200 to leave her there unattended until I could find someone to pick her up. I called my boss, the owner of the company, and told him that given the press buzz, I wouldn't be able to be effective. I told him that Carrie was with me and that she hadn't made any decisions yet. Carrie was dressed in her classic uniform, t-shirt, skinny jeans, and loafer shoes. She had a medium-sized bag with her that held the rest of her belongings. She was glowing with happiness as we pulled onto the Chesapeake and headed south. I asked her, do you want to put up a sail? She replied, sure. If I'm going to be your helper, I need to learn everything. I showed her the winch and motor and started hoisting the sail while she steered the boat. The weather was beautiful, as it often is in the fall on the Chesapeake. As soon as the sail filled and crackled, the boat lay on starboard tack. I returned to the helm, and she sat down beside me. For a couple minutes, we stared at the water. Then she asked, what does that mean, Paul? I didn't need to ask what she was talking about. I said, you'd have to be an idiot to get burned that badly, and then turn around and get involved with an even hotter specimen, especially one who's a decade younger. But it's so right. And I think you feel the same way. As long as we're honest with each other and always talk things out, I think it's going to work for a while. And I'm willing to take the risk, even though it seems like the stupidest thing to do, if you think about it rationally. She looked at me with huge cat eyes and said, nothing good happens without an outstretched hand, and the effort it takes to maintain a healthy relationship is the hardest part. Said, the only thing I promise you is that I won't give up on you. She gave me her dimples and said, I've been through a lot more of this kind of thing than you or Janet. And I know all the pitfalls. I know you've been hurt by someone you trusted. I would never do that to you. But there's no way I can prove it except through time. In the meantime, I want this to go as stress-free as possible. It's a very brave thing to start something with me, and I feel the weight of responsibility it entails. You will never regret it. We spent the first night in Mob Jack Cove, away from the boat traffic at the mouth of the James River. I cooked a small dinner of rice and crab meat with a light Old Bay seasoning. Carrie drinks beer, not wine, and we washed it all down with a cold Yuengling and admired the sunset. She cozied up in my arms on the bench at the port side. She seemed to be concentrating. Then she said, "Does this seem as unreal to you as it does to me? 2 weeks ago, we had just kicked gold out of your office and you were happily married." I wondered. It was as if the incredible force of the emotions spewed out during that time, combined with the sharp and swift revenge, had created a rift in the time-space continuum. And every aspect of what I knew as reality collapsed. Now it seemed to me that Kari had always been here, in my arms. And my 10-year marriage to Janet was something that happened to a different person. It wasn't a fake time travel story I'd made up to justify my merry sailing off into the sunset. The universe itself seemed to be rearranging itself to make happen what was originally supposed to happen. I loved Janet unconditionally. I'd never even looked at another woman. And I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been dictated to. But it was as if fate demanded it. I had no doubt that the fiery and resilient little woman I held in my arms was not the person I loved. And that was a feeling I couldn't ignore. Carrie had always been close to me. From the very first day she'd shown up at work looking like the smartest, most eager girl. And she'd never given me the slightest hint that there was anything between us. Unless it was a relationship between two close friends at work. I never had romantic feelings for her. She was my assistant and peer. But this strange new bond had sprung up under the white heat of infidelity, and our time with Janet was irrevocably over. I hated to destroy my marriage so quickly, but the consequences of her betrayal were simply devastating. Janet was dead to me, and Carrie had become irreplaceable. I saw Carrie in a new light, a light that made me see the woman she really was. I was to understand what it was about her past that made her so wise. I was afraid I wouldn't like the story, but I had to hear it. I began to think that this wasn't just an affair, some kind of convenient panacea for my marriage syndrome. And if it wasn't, I needed to know who I was dealing with. Anyway, we got down to business. After a while, coming to her senses, she said in an unsure voice, "Now you know my big secret." I replied, "I don't know what you're talking about. My brain is still too confused to think straight." I broke up 2 marriages before my senior year at Georgetown. The first time, I was ashamed. They had kids. The second time, I didn't care anymore because the guy knocked me up. I'm Catholic, so I don't believe in abortion. And I was afraid of becoming a mom. The guy ran away after his wife caught us. So I faced motherhood alone. And I was very scared. My future changed when I had a miscarriage in my first trimester. I went back to life as a single girl, but I spent 3 months thinking about it. I thought a lot about where my life was going. I came to the conclusion that if I didn't learn to control my impulses, I would find myself on a very slippery slope. Unlike most women my age, I had already traveled every dark road in existence, and I knew what awaited me at the end of each one. So I started looking for ways to control myself. I also matured a bit. And then I met you. You changed everything for me. It was an amazing statement. She said, "I fell in love with you from the day I first saw you. At times my love for you has been almost all-consuming. But you are an honest and moral man, and you were married to a woman who was so superior to me in every way that I could not even hope to be like that. As a result, our relationship never touched on any aspect of my beauty. I knew that you loved Janet, and that Janet loved you as much as I did. I just wanted to live my life in a way that would make you proud of me. And if I was lucky, I hoped I could spend the rest of my life by your side. It never occurred to me that Janet would fall into the same trap I did. Everything changed the moment Janet lost her way. I knew you would never accept her betrayal, and this was an opportunity to show you that I could be the woman you deserved." I looked at her gorgeous little face. She was almost begging me. I wondered how I could have been so lucky. I knew a few things. First, my marriage was dead. Therefore, in my mind, there would be no moral restraints with Carrie. Second, I knew that marriage vows were still a long way off, and so we had plenty of time to figure out if things would work out or not. I confidently said, "All I care about is the man standing here. And for almost 4 years now, you have been my absolutely reliable, loyal, steadfast, and caring friend and companion." She patted my shoulder. I knew from her dimples and sunny smile that she intended to be the best lover and companion a man could ever dream of. So I said, "Okay, then let's go to the Bahamas and wait out the divorce. I need a nice sunny place where I can take shelter from the rain." She looked puzzled. She didn't get the hint. But since this was the old life, she didn't need to. She was my sunshine now. Epilogue: Janet fought the divorce to the last. Her story turned into a narrative of how cruel I had been in rejecting her, her words, for being harassed, her words again. Needless to say, after this revelation, the divorce went through without further ado. Some part of me wanted her to end her life in a cardboard box under an overpass. But I've accepted that in real life, bad people often don't suffer for their actions. That's the way it is, no matter what the books tell you. Daddy, on the other hand, robbed Simpson of all the money he had and then threw him out on the street without leaving a single friend in the world. The idiot got what he deserved. So the scales balanced out to some extent. Meanwhile, my exquisite lover and best friend had become a Freeport celebrity. After a week of sailing, we ended up at the Port Lucaya wharf. We lived on a boat, hung out at the market, and swam at Lucian Beach. Every day, it seemed like half the male population was waiting for Carrie to show up. One evening in mid-March, we sat at an oceanfront table at the Coral Reef Bar. It was another perfect Bahamian evening. The setting sun was coloring the tropical sky with reds, oranges, and purples. She looked up at me with her eerie green cat eyes. Her glowing blonde hair, perfect golden skin, and white dress complemented her stunning appearance flawlessly. I said, "I have something to ask you." She replied, "Sure." But she didn't let go of my hand. I said, "You'll have to let go of my hand so I can do it." She looked disgusted. I got up, walked around the table, and knelt down next to her. She saw this happening and started crying. I held out the ring and said, "Carrie Whitman, do me the honor of becoming my wife." She cried on my shoulder, saying, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes," and burst into happy tears. The people around us applauded. We were married by the priest at Mary Star of the Sea Church. She wore white and I wore my best guayabera. The next week we sailed back. We both needed to find work to our heart's content. But we were both tired of playing commercial intelligence. So we opened a boutique catering to some of our former clients. We made a lot of money from that, but most importantly, we always worked together. Janet and I had different careers, and eventually that separation led to our demise. Carrie and I shared everything and always focused only on each other. Unless we were the perfect couple, such closeness would inevitably lead to friction. But the more we worked together, the closer we became. One Saturday morning, Carrie came in from a mysterious meeting. She entered the room where I was working. She said worriedly, "Paul, we need to talk." I thought, oh my God, this is serious. I followed her out onto the terrace. We now lived in McLean and had a big, beautiful backyard. We sat in the familiar chairs and looked at the flower beds. She said, "I've just been to the doctor and he confirmed something I need to tell you about." I thought, oh shit, that's a big S. She looked even more concerned and said, "I've been unprotected for the last few months because I want your baby. I was going to discuss it with you before things went too far, but it looks like they've already gone too far. I'm 2 months pregnant. We're going to be parents soon." I know we promised we'd always talk about important things like this, but I didn't think it would be this soon. She looked at me uncertainly, as if I might kick her out for daring to bear my children. I remembered how her last pregnancy had gone and realized I had to be gentle. I took her hand and said, "I didn't think you could make me happier, but you did." Her face lit up as if all the worries in the world had vanished. She gifted me with a full set of dimples and said, "I love you. I will always love you. And now there is another person who will love you." I said, "Kari, it's almost fate that I went from the worst moment of my life to the best with you. But it happened. And it's all because you are who you are. I will love you more than you love me, because you have given my life meaning I didn't even realize I had. Now let's start buying things for the nursery. I need to spoil the little girl." She asked, "What if it's a boy?" I replied, "A woman like you can't give birth to anything but an exceptional firstborn." And I was right. Little Eliza Schmidt was an exact replica of her mother. The same devotion she gave to all 4 of our children. It was a beautiful life. Epilogue to epilogue. I was lying in a hospital bed when they all arrived. Carrie was well into her 70s, but as far as I could tell, she was as beautiful as ever. I knew I didn't have long to live, but thanks to my angel, I was living life to the fullest. I took her hand in mine. She smiled her dimpled smile. I whispered, "I love you." She squeezed my hand, gasping to speak. As she spoke, the room shrank to a single point of blinding light. Slipping away, I heard only the sobs of family members. I didn't feel the slightest fear. I knew I would see her on the other side. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.